The Truth Radio Show with Dan Bidondi. We got a special guest today, Infowars.com nightly news host, and he's the fill-in for Alex Jones' show. Great reporter, good friend of mine, David Knight, and we're going to talk about the immigration problem. It's big going on, folks. The war on vaccines are still going on. I mean, anti-vaccines are now trying to, Facebook's trying to censor anti-vaxxers now. More censorship from FedBook and driverless cars. And what you think about them. But David Knight's got to break all this down. And without further ado, Mr. Knight, how you doing, sir?
Doing good, Dan. Good to hear you.
Oh, great. You same here, brother. And yeah, you want to do, give everybody a brief introduction, how you got involved with Infowars, the contest, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I came here as part of that same contest that you came here for. I guess it's been about 2.5 years ago now, and just been working here, like you said, hosting the nightly news, doing reports. I've had some interesting trips. We went out to the Bundy Ranch. Josh and I got in the middle of that. That was quite an experience. It was an experience of a lifetime, quite actually. I came away from that very, very, very encouraged because I saw people stand up and say, you're not going to get violent with my neighbors. You're not going to steal my neighbor's land. And they stood up to the police, and they weren't the police. That was the key thing. It was a Bureau of Land Management. Clive and Bundy and the rest of the people there were asking the legitimate law enforcement to stand up and to take these people on. They refused to do it. So it was good to see that after, a couple of weeks of them, the BLM having snipers pointed at people, having areas roped off, saying that this is going to be, this is your free speech area out in the middle of nowhere. This is the only place that you can exercise your First Amendment rights. Somebody they had a nicely printed, professionally printed sign that said free speech area with this orange plastic fencing that you see everywhere, for construction projects. And somebody put on that fencing, the free speech is not an area. And so it was good to see people stand up peacefully but firmly for their rights, for their neighbors' rights. And so, yeah, just been doing other things like filling in for Alex occasionally when necessary, when he has to be away.
Yeah, outstanding job. I mean, nobody does it better than you when you, because I'm a loud person, whatever, but you got this calm, collective voice, and nobody's better than you just sticking it to the New World Order, nice, calm, and collectively, and you're like a sharp sword, man. It's great. And that work you did at the Bundy Ranch, outstanding. I mean, you're definitely amazing person.
We were just recording it. We were just there to record it. It was really the Bundys that did everything the right way. They didn't tip their hand ahead of time, and they weren't going to be outmaneuvered and placated. When they said, all right, you're going to create a big problem here, you're going to stand up for your rights. Okay, after we've driven every other rancher in the area out of business, we'll let you graze in this area. And they knew that wasn't going to last very long, but it also was pretty much an empty promise because they had already stolen their cattle. And so what he did was he said, all right, Sheriff, thanks for that. But you know what we want? We want you to get the weapons of these people who've been terrorizing our community for several weeks. I want you to take those weapons from them and stack them on the stage. I want you to do it in a couple of hours. And the sheriff was kind of like a, sheepish looking guy. And of course that didn't happen. And when it didn't happen, Bundy had already decided, he'd already worked with some of the people who were there with horses and everything. He said, let's go get the cattle. He says, you don't have to go. They didn't really organize anything. That was the whole thing. It was, they had decided what they were going to do, but people were free to do it or not to do it on their own as they wanted to, as they decided. So most of the mainstream media had already been tipped that the BLM was going to give them special rights and privileges that they had taken away from everybody else and had gone home. And so there were just a few of us around there. The only mainstream media that was there was one Fox cameraman, and the rest of it was alternative media. So, yeah, it was an interesting experience. But it just keeps going. Today we were at a welcoming city initiative here for Austin. There's 49 cities, Dan, throughout the United States that are part of this welcoming initiative. They've got cities and counties. There's 6 of them in Michigan. There's 4 in North Carolina. There's 3 in California. What they're trying to do is essentially set up incentives to increase illegal immigration. When I talked to the woman there, I said, so when you're talking about immigrants, let's say you're talking about legal or illegal. And she said, well, we don't make that distinction. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, very interesting. And I know Austin is a model city for Agenda 21, like Alex was saying. And when I was out there, we went to several these UN, I call it Agenda 21 conferences, but sustainability meetings and all that. Out in Elgin, Texas, Aaron Dykes and Rob Dew and all. I mean, Darren McBreen and all that. But it's sickening what's going on. I mean, and this is ultimately Agenda 21. They just try to push down our throats.
It's very much like Agenda 21, Dan. And what they have, the people that are supporting this, of course, are the Carnegie Foundation. You've got something called the Intercultural Innovation Group, the award. It's the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, along with the BMW Group, pushing on all this. You've got Western Union, of course, being a big supporter of this because they make a lot of money as people wire their money back home to a foreign country. But the way that they're putting this is that they're saying that this is an opportunity for them to learn how this is being done in other communities globally. So they see themselves as citizens of the world. They also then say that it is a grassroots organization. Dan, there's nothing grassroots about it. This operates in the same way, as you're aware of, that Agenda 21 does. They come in with this Delphi technique. They've already got a very detailed agenda, and they present that to people that they call stakeholders. It could be local residents. In this case, it is businesses and government officials. They come in and they tell them, this is how Obama's executive orders are going to play out. This is what you can do. Isn't it great that you can hire immigrants? And we're going to talk about how we can spread benefits to people. But they pull this back when they start talking about immigrant rights. And I questioned the lady and I said, what do you mean about immigrant rights? So what rights do immigrants have? She said, well, the same rights that everybody has, just to be treated nicely. That's not what they're talking about. We went into one of the meetings and they were in the midst of talking about how they were going to get driver's licenses for illegal aliens here in Texas. They want to get them driver's licenses. They want to get them voting rights. They want to give them schooling, education. They're bringing them in with an attitude.
Too, remember?
Yeah, exactly. And we go back and we look at the stats. Since 2000, if you look at the jobs that have been created in America, and you look at how many jobs are held by immigrants, both legal and illegal, you see that the number of jobs created is exactly equal to the number of immigrant jobs that are here. The bottom line is native-born Americans are losing their job opportunities. They're seeing their income taken down. That's the whole reason why the corporations want to bring in a large number of illegal immigrants. And they're seeing their taxes go up because somebody has to pay for these entitlement programs. And the entitlement programs are there in order to destroy the economy of the Western nations through this immigration. Of course, there's many different aspects of it. They have the balkanization, where you have different ethnic groups that they're going to be able to pit one against the other. But it's really destroying the economy so that the Western nations aren't in a position where they can oppose this globalist agenda that's being forced on us. And the way they get away with it is by saying, well, we just want to be treated fairly. We just want you to recognize the value of multiculturalism. This political correctness is used to shut everybody up. The minute you start talking about the fact that there ought to be some controls over who comes in, there ought to be controls just like there are in other countries. We can't go to third world countries. We can't go to Mexico, for example, and get free education, free health care, a driver's license. We can't vote in Mexico. Why should it be only the other way around? And of course, once you start talking like that, they try to shut you down, saying you're xenophobic, you're racist. That is the strategy that they have used to keep people from defending the destruction of their nations. It makes them embarrassed to talk about it.
Security, they set up that immigration hotline. I mean, if your rights as an immigrant, which you shouldn't have rights at all as an American citizen, but if your rights are violated according to them, you should call the immigration complaint hotline. And, it's like, what the hell is going on?
Oh, yeah, we've got situations where it was Judicial Watch found a document that they had sent out to the Border Patrol saying, if you find somebody that is drunk driving, you've got three options. You can detain them yourself, you can detain them at the request of law enforcement, or you can just simply let them go. We would suggest that you take that third option, just simply let them go, because if you do the other two, you're opening yourself up to some kind of a lawsuit. And so that's what they're doing. They're telling them, just let the drunk drivers go. We have a competition here within Austin, for example, as something's going on throughout the country. We have a sheriff who's a Democrat. We have a police chief who's a Democrat, Art Acevedo. And Art Acevedo is in opposition to the Secure Communities Act. This is something that's been around for a while. The sheriff supports it. What the Secure Communities Act requires is that when they arrest somebody, that they send their information to the FBI to check for a criminal record, and they send their information if they suspect them of being an illegal immigrant to ICE. And either one of those organizations can request that they hold that person there and can come and pick them up if they find that they're in violation. Well, that to me seems perfectly reasonable that you would want to, that's something that sheriffs have been doing for a long time. It's something that he's told that has to do. And so you've got a Democrat sheriff here fighting the Democrat Party and these immigrant rights groups, essentially saying that, no, you shouldn't give any information about people that you pick up. If they're criminals, if they're illegal immigrants, which is a crime. Say that's a crime. You shouldn't have to, you're not going to be allowed to give that information to other law enforcement agencies that have requested. So there's a fight going on within law enforcement. There's a fight going on within the Border Patrol, within the federal government. There's a fight going on within even the Democrat Party as to, how this is going to play out. But it really is an existential threat to this country because it is a way that they're going to take down the West. And make no mistake about it, there is a globalist agenda here. They don't use the word agenda. They talk about a framework. They have a very carefully set out system of plans that they want to enact in each of these communities. And that's what they do when they come to these meetings. They present these things to people, and then they pretend to have some kind of a meeting where they're going to arrive at a consensus. It's total nonsense.
Amazing. I mean, it really is. And, never mind the return of veterans that come home, get stuck out in the streets. They're lucky to get a job at McDonald's, and they're going home with why we're, our Homeland Security's busing them in on luxury buses. That immigration center, that big one out in Texas, they just opened up now too. Jay Johnson, Secretary of Homeland Security, initiates this brand new installation and just housing these non-citizens versus our vets being stuck out in the street with nowhere to go. I mean, it's just backwards. It really is.
Well, Jan, we just had a situation over the weekend. We had it was reported initially as a prison riot. And they said it was about 2,800 prisoners are going to have to be relocated because they completely destroyed the prison. Today, Breitbart went down to it and looked. It's at McAllen, Texas, which should have been a tip. We should have taken a look down there as well. But what they noticed was that this was essentially a detention center for illegal immigrants who had come over who were suspected of being violent criminals. So it was illegal immigrants burning down this prison that has been contracted by the federal government as a private prison and completely destroying it. So that's the kind of thing that we're concerned about. One of the things that really made me angry at this conference, Dan, was that they were talking about, how do we understand these people who are opposed to immigration? Of course, they think that it's simply we don't like people from other countries. And it's not that at all. We fundamentally disagree with them because we think there's a big difference between legal and illegal immigrants. Exactly. There's a huge difference. Yeah. You don't come into a community and say, I just want to be treated nicely, and I just, that's not what they're about. They're coming in here asserting that they have entitlements to certain services, okay? And they come in here saying, I'm entitled to this, I'm entitled to that, flaunting our laws. That's not a good way to start.
No.
And that's our concern about this. But what they said was, this is happening mostly because you got to remember, most of the people who complain about this are ranchers around the border. They're upset that people are coming onto their property. And because they're loud and because they're rich, they get listened to. That's the way they presented it. Now, you know that we've gone down there. We've taken, John Bound went down there and took pictures of, at one ranch, the guy took them around and they took pictures of all these decomposing bodies and cadavers. People are dying, crossing over. And they have drug gangs that are crossing over. They got human trafficking that is going on there. People are dying on their property. They're finding carcasses there. They feel threatened that they have to walk around and they have to carry pretty heavy-duty semi-automatic weapons with them. It's not simply get off of my grass because I'm a bad person and listen to me because I'm loud and rich. That's not it at all. I mean, the way that they're characterizing this and the demands that they're making, they're coming in with a real attitude. And they also switch it around and say, look, the people who are coming in here in Austin, especially 15% of the people are tech employees. And it's like, well, that's not really what we're talking about, is it? That's not the 20,000 that come in 1 month that the governor's talking about. We're looking at people who are coming in, even in the tech sector, even those people that are coming in, they're coming in legally, and they're coming in with the help and the assistance of the company they're going to be working for. So they're not illegals. They're coming in through the system. Now, we could still look at that and we could say foreign workers like those that are coming in India in the tech sector, they are depressing American wages. They are, causing us to lose job opportunities. Those people that are being brought in from India or wherever to do these high-tech jobs. Those are jobs that are not going to be going to my son or to your son. Okay? And so we see that our income is going down. We see our job opportunities are going down, but we see our taxes are going up because we have to pay so many services, especially education. So something's got to give. Absolutely. People are not happy about this. And so they want to bring these people in. They know that the voters are it's not going to take long before people start putting this together, and they're going to be very angry, and they're going to lose. They're going to have basically a mass insurrection against us. So what they have to do is they have to bring in, quote unquote, citizens from outside of the country. People who will vote them in, even though the legitimate voters of the country don't like what they're doing, they're going to bring in other people. It's really kind of like what they do with gerrymandering, except they're doing it through immigration.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. And yeah, you're right. They want to bring these people in so they automatically get the votes. And I mean, this country's going to hell in the handbasket big time. And again, like I tell people too, like none of us are against people coming to want to move to this country to get away from the oppression and tyranny, but right. Do it the legal way. I wouldn't go into your country and say, hey, I demand rights, I want to live off your welfare and all that. No, I would learn your language, I would learn your customs and respect it. You know what I mean? And but you don't have that today. I mean, it's just out of control right now.
Well, it's a situation that is not just here in Austin. It's throughout this country. It's not just in America. It's throughout the West. And they're doing this in Western Europe as well. They're doing it, bringing in people that were in former colonies and saying, look, you went into these places, you did these brutal colonial operations that you carried on in third world countries. So now these people are your responsibility, and they can come in with open borders. Whatever the rationale, the multiculturalism, the open borders, and the entitlement state are being used by the globalists, by the bankers, essentially to destroy the industrialized country and oppose their global governance. That's the key to all this. And of course, when we look at this welcoming America, they say building a nation of neighbors. It sounds exactly like what Nancy Pelosi said at the border. She said, we have one community that just happens to have a border running through it. And of course, David Petraeus said that we have what comes after America. This is a speech that he gave, a presentation he gave in London. He said, what comes after America? Well, that's easy, North America. And he spelled it out that what he meant was the North American Union. The NAFTA trade agreement was not simply a trade agreement. And we've all been saying that for 20 years. Now they're saying it, Dan, and they're saying that it's not simply a trade agreement, but they have restructured and destroyed our national sovereignty. And that's the reason they're going.
Lou Dobbs, I mean, he came out, one of the first mainstream reporters to come out and say, hey, listen, George Bush, Canadian president, prime minister from the other way around, whatever, from Mexico, whatever, all signed, this country away to North American Union, and with the NAFTA and that Clinton pushed along too, and one president after another just keeps continuing and pushing on this North American Union thing, and I mean, like,
well, what's happening? What's happened with the North American Union? They've had this for 20 years, and it wasn't just a trade agreement. That's the way it was sold to everybody. It was sold to us as a trade agreement. Ironically enough, NAFTA was sold to us as a way to end illegal immigration. But it was not a way to end illegal immigration. It was not a way to end, it was not a trade agreement. It was essentially a sovereignty agreement. And now that they're going to the next level, Dan, they're going to the transatlantic and the trans-Pacific partnerships. Those are being negotiated in secret by corporate lobbyists. Our elected representatives are not allowed to see it. They're not allowed to give it to the press. All we know about it is what's been leaked by WikiLeaks. And those two agreements are not about free trade. No. They're not simply economic agreements. As you know, they are the next step in global governance consolidation. And so at this point now, they're taking the mask off of NAFTA and the North American Union, and they're showing people what we've got here because they're about to drop the next shoe. And they're going to run this thing through with fast track. They're going to have a several thousand-page document. The Congress is not going to be allowed to see it, and they're going to require that they pass it in a very short time frame without any amendments. It's going to be rammed through. And so I think that's what's behind this now, Dan. I think this is why they're openly talking about how we have a North American Union, talking about how there's no more nation between us and Mexico. And understand, too, that this also involves Canada. This Keystone Pipeline thing that's happening right now, the thing that really concerns me so much about that is the fact that, A, the Republicans have voted this thing in 10 times. 10 times. They're on their 10th iteration, knowing in the past that they weren't going to get it. They've always known they're not going to get it past Obama. They knew the first 9 times they did it, they had a Democrat-controlled Senate. They weren't going to get it past them, but they're performing for their masters. And the thing that concerns me about it, Dan, is apart from the whatever people think about the environmental issues or the oil issues or whatever, whether or not they like the pipeline, the thing that I'm most concerned about is that a Canadian corporation, TransCanada, that owns this Keystone Pipeline, is being given the freedom, the power to come in and use eminent domain and to seize farms that have been in people's families in many cases for over 100 years throughout Nebraska. This is something that's being fought in the courts now. It's being appealed in the courts. They already lost, but now they're appealing this decision. To me, that is outrageous because eminent domain, I don't even like eminent domain when it's being done for public purposes. But you know, the Kello decision that was in New London, I think it was Connecticut, the Supreme Court had about 5 years ago, basically allowed one public corporation to take the property of somebody else's private property and use it for their own private project. That was never the purpose of eminent domain. Eminent domain was always to compensate people if their property was taken for public purposes. Now, in the Keystone situation, they're very big about reminding everybody that, hey, this is all privately funded. So why wouldn't you let this thing get built? It might create some jobs. Well, if it's privately funded, why would that private corporation from another country be allowed to seize the private property of people here in America, of American citizens? I mean, it's like, you know, some animals are more equal than other animals, right out of George Orwell, isn't it?
Yep, exactly. That's exactly the role that this is going down. And 1984 is just a script of what's happening today. It's really, I mean, again, truth is stranger than fiction. And people, I mean, you need to investigate the North American Union, the transatlantic partnership and everything else. I mean, this is outright unconstitutional. And again, go to YouTube, look at the videos from Lou Dobbs. I mean, there's one of the reasons why, and also him attacking the amnesty thing, that, they forced him to resign off the air. And Infowars.com, Alex Jones has been covering this from day one, back in the Bush era, when they were pushing the North American Union. Nobody else was talking about this. And this is just a big step, a broader step to the New World Order, a one world government. And exactly what Dave is saying here, we're seeing this unfold before our eyes. And now people don't think, wait a minute, Infowars ain't such a wackos anyway, after all. They're not such the tinfoil hat people anymore, because they were right. We were right about the TV spying you. We were right about the cell phones, and we were right about the NSA. And we tell the truth, and we risk our lives to do this. I mean, David Knight, all of us, we had to, sacrifice our lives, whatever, to get this information out. And, people now are starting to realize, hey, Infowars is not a joke. We're not a tabloid magazine.
Yeah, exactly. The false flags, like you helped to expose, like up in Boston, the way they engineer events, the way they use an event, even if it legitimately happens, the way that they co-opt that event, elaborate that event, and fit it into the legislative agenda, that really has to be exposed. And, going back to this Keystone thing, I mean, the dangerous precedent, the unconstitutional precedent that was set by our Supreme Court in the Kello case, now you see this moving incrementalism. First, that was one private corporation versus another, and within the United States. Now they've taken it to the next level. Now they're allowing multinational corporations to come in and take our private property. And we no longer have any property rights. We no longer have any rights as far as anything is concerned, Dan. It's just really the kind of incrementalism that we see happening is very distressing. I just was sent a reminder, and of course this is something that's been going on a long time, since last July. Michelle Obama, you might remember, she went to a naturalization ceremony with some people, and she said, like the 50 of you, none of the founding fathers were born American. They became American. Well, of course, Snopes will come back and say, oh, she knew that they were actually born in America. She was just saying, and she did further down, they were Americans by choice. Well, Dan, the founders, first of all, 50 of the 56 rather. I'm sorry, 8 of the 56 were not born in America. The rest of them, many of them, had been here for multiple generations. They saw themselves as Americans. They didn't become Americans because they created an American government. They were already Americans. They were already culturally distinct. The British called them Americans. So they understood they were British and the Americans were American, and the Americans understood that as well. They did not have a declaration of dependence. They had a declaration of independence. They wanted their freedom more than they wanted to be secure, more than they wanted to be safe, more than they wanted to be comfortable or taken care of or educated or fed. Barack Obama knows this. Michelle Obama knows this. Barack Obama spoke even before he became president. Of course, he's a constitutional scholar. He understands that there's things called positive rights and negative rights. When we talk about the Constitution, he said, you know, in the Constitution, it has a lot of prohibitions about what government can do. And when we talk about rights of Americans, what the Constitution did was it set up negative rights, saying you have a right to speak and the government won't interfere with that. You have a right to worship and the government won't interfere with that. You have a right to keep and bear arms and the government won't interfere with that, and on and on and on. He said that's the weakness of our Constitution. We should have positive rights. The Constitution should be coming in and saying you have a right to health care, you have a right to education, you have a right to all these different social services. That is not what America is about. That's why they're bringing these people in. And whenever you say you have a right to something, when you assert that you have a positive right, whether it's education or healthcare, you're asserting that somebody else has to pay that for you, which means that you're going to enslave that person with a tax system in order to pay that for you. So it is absolutely, they have taken the Declaration of Independence, the foundations of our country, they've turned them upside down. They ignore the very law that they have sworn to uphold, the Constitution. It's a dead letter as far as they're concerned. But I think it's still important for us to point out what the Constitution says, because when we do that, it shows that they have no legitimate authority. It shows that they have sworn allegiance to a king, the Constitution, and then they have betrayed that allegiance as stewards. They have basically, it's kind of like if you look at the Lord of the Rings, they're kind of like Denethor. You know, if you want an analogy, you know, the bad steward who says, I want to be the king. I'm going to do everything I can to keep the lawful king out. Well, that's the kind of government that we have now. And it's not just Obama, of course, it's the Republicans as well.
Absolutely. And we know the whole right-wing, left-wing false paradigm. Republicans right now are playing in favor of for our rights, but if they get into office, which they're probably going to swing the pendulum over to probably Jeb Bush, and it's going to put America back to sleep. That's exactly what's going to happen. And, it's just it's nonstop. It's like a professional wrestling act. I mean, good guy versus bad guy. He becomes a good guy now, and it's a joke. It really is. And that's why people are waking up. Less and less people turn out to vote now. The polls we did on Infowars a while ago, and plus Gallup polls, showed that people don't trust Republican or Democrat no more. I mean, like, people are waking up. And,
that's right.
Now it's time for, we got a lot of people waking, so now it's time for us, we the people, to start taking action politically and going out there, confronting politicians, letting them know, say, hey, listen, you work for us. We're not afraid of you, okay? We know what you're about, and if you don't stop, we're going to press charges for treason. Do what we have to do as the public to take control of our government again.
That's what you do really well, Dan, is confronting the powerful, not being afraid to speak truth to them, not being afraid to shout out if they won't pay any attention to you, because they don't pay attention to us. They do everything they can to marginalize us, to try to censor us, just like what you were mentioning before about Facebook, how Time Magazine is calling for Facebook to essentially censor anybody talking about informed consent. That's the thing that concerns me so much about all this vaccine stuff, Dan, is, I have looked at this issue and I have real safety concerns about it. The first rule of medicine ought to be do no harm. That was always there as part of the medical ethics, was to do no harm. So the first thing we ought to look at is safety. We're not allowed to see those studies that they have. We pointed out in articles in the news last week how people have gone in and with research projects, Columbia University, they found the redacted statements from the FDA. They will redact the information that is negative to the pharmaceutical companies. They will redact the names of the pharmaceutical companies. So we're not getting any information about what the true risks are with the vaccines. And of course, they want to come in and they want to say the science of vaccines is settled. I understand what active immunity is. I understand what passive immunity is. We talked about this as the Ebola outbreak was happening. You know, remember people were getting the convalescent blood serum transfusions? Remember that?
Oh, yeah. And if you want to hold it right there for a minute, because we do got to go to a quick break for a network break, whatever. And, you know, folks, you know, we're going to get to the vaccine thing. And, you know, regardless if you do vaccinate yourself and your children or not, the point is, what we're trying to explain is, we're trying to show information that's bad, and also you should have a right to say yes or no. But anyway, we'll be right back on the Truth Radio Show on shakeandwakeradio.com, freedomizerradio.com, and alternatecurrentradio.com. And this is Dan Bidondi with David Knight. We'll be right back.
My friends, we have done it. With Dr. Group's help, we have developed the ultimate male vitality supplement with 8 concentrated super herbs. This is the answer to the globalist war on male vitality with the estrogen mimickers they've added to the food and the water supply. And now our test pilot, our Chuck Yeager, Dr. Edward Group, is here to test his greatest invention. Doctor?
Thank you, Alex. I will now take 2 droppers to test this ultimate male vitality formula.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a momentous moment. Thank you, Dr. Group.
I will activate my muscles by doing push-ups.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is it. This is the move. This is unprecedented. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to see what happens right now. Oh my God! What the hell? Wait. Get out of here. Shut this down. This is not safe. This is not, hold on. Settle down. Get another doctor. Something's wrong. Something's wrong with him helping. Ladies and gentlemen, we did not intend for that to happen. I take it personally. Do not have those problems. Again, these are authorized herbs, well known to be safe. Please, doctor, wait a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just going to cut to commercial for just a moment. Cut. Get everybody out of here.
Super male vitality. It's awesome. Just not this awesome.
Oh my God! What the hell? Ladies and gentlemen, the dramatization you've just seen is just that. It is satire to illustrate in a satirical way the incredible power of super male vitality. It will not turn you into Conan the Barbarian, but it will help block some of the estrogen mimickers and reportedly let your glands produce the natural hormones your body needs. It also does have some other side effects in the human testing that we discovered, ladies and gentlemen. I'm about to illustrate right now what that is. Let's see if I can do it again. It takes some focus. Up, and away!
Start your journey to super male vitality today at InfoWarsLife.com.
And welcome back to the Truth Radio Show, folks. Again, we need you to take broad steps as parents, as human beings, to investigate this information. Don't take our word for it. Go do the investigation. And speaking of investigations, Infowars has been leading the charge on vaccination information. And sorry to cut you off, Dave, and we were talking about basically the vaccinations and all that. And if you want to continue.
No, actually, what you said and when we closed for the commercial was exactly right, Dan. It is really about our informed consent. If they don't give us any information, and if they say they no longer need our consent, people should understand how fundamentally dangerous that is. If we go back and we look at the outbreak of swine flu back in the 70s, and at a time when the owned by the pharmaceutical companies because they didn't have every other commercial was in the pharmaceutical commercial. 60 Minutes, which was CBS, and Mike Wallace went in after the fact and looked at the swine flu outbreak. They had over 40 million people vaccinated. They had over 4,000 people seriously injured. Many of them died. They had Guillain-Barré syndrome was rampant on this. And they went back and they talked to the head of the CDC and they said, how many cases had you positively identified of swine flu before you scared the country into getting these vaccines. And the guy kind of stuttered around like I'm doing right now, like they do on 60 Minutes, you know, when they put the camera in and they zoom in on him, you can see the guy sweat. And he goes, well, we had some reports, but we hadn't confirmed any. Nevertheless, they went on this massive thing telling everybody that they had to get vaccinated against the swine flu, essentially telling them that it was effective, okay? And then it was interesting. They said that they needed consent of the patient. So they were setting this up. The government was massively vaccinating the public in a massive program all at once. So you go to these areas, and they didn't have the drugstores vaccinating people like they are today. But they would go to these centers and get vaccinated, and there was no doctors there. So they said, well, because we don't have doctors there, we need to get the consent of the patients because there's no doctor-patient relationship whatsoever. So they gave them a sheet that told them what the possible side effects were going to be. The problem is that the sheet that they gave them was for a different vaccine. So they were lying to them about that. Bottom line is they scared the public, they railroaded them into something that was not safe. It was not effective. They did not give them information. And the consent that they got was based on dishonest flyers that given to the public, and it turned out to be very bad. There were a lot of people that were harmed by it. Nobody was helped by it. They didn't have a swine flu epidemic. What they had was an epidemic of dangerous vaccines with severe life-long or life-ending effects. And that's what we're concerned about, Dan. We were talking about, just before the break, going back to Ebola, when people were getting blood transfusions, and we talked about that as convalescent serum, that is passive immunity. That is getting the antibodies that somebody who survived Ebola or whatever the disease is, they've got antibodies still in their plasma. So you wait a period of time until the virus or the disease is gone, and then you extract those antibodies from their blood plasma and give them to people who are sick, and immediately helps them to start fighting the disease. So that's a passive immunity. It's different from a vaccine, which is active immunity. With a vaccine, before somebody gets the disease, you would inject them with a dead or weakened version of the disease, and then their body would presumably react to that and produce its own antibodies, and those antibodies then would hopefully stay around and protect them against the disease. We've seen that that doesn't work too well in the case of the MMR vaccine. We've seen that people who have been vaccinated twice, we have records of that. In New York, they had an outbreak in 2011. Patient 0, the one who came down with measles, the one who started with measles, was a twice vaccinated person. They passed on to 4 other people, all of whom had evidence of being vaccinated. 2 of them had records showing that they had been vaccinated twice. The other 2 had antibodies in their blood that indicated that they had been vaccinated. So you have 5 people involved, all of them vaccinated. Patient 0 has been vaccinated. Patient 0 gets the disease, gets measles, and then is able to pass it on to 4 other people. They said, and they still do in their literature, that that can't happen. The CDC says you can get measles-like symptoms, but you can't get the measles from the vaccine, and you can't pass it on to other people. Yet it did happen. It happened there. We've also seen that.
I mean, if you get symptoms like the disease, you got something or of the disease. I mean, that does not make sense at all.
It's absurd on the face of it. And so that's all we're saying, is that we're concerned that it is not as effective as it is. And quite frankly, when they're, braying on about their herd immunity is really based on the efficacy of the vaccine for each individual. And it's not very effective. And if you want to look at herd immunity, go back to 1987. That was about 25 years after they'd come up with the measles vaccine. They had a lot of cases that year. They had, I think it was over just under 4,000 cases of measles that year, and 52% of the people who came down with measles had been vaccinated. Yeah. At that point, what they did was they changed the vaccination schedule. They stepped it up to doing 2. That still hasn't proven to be effective over a long term. It's not nearly as effective as getting this harmless disease as a child. And I say harmless, even though some people have died from it, complications, because people die from colds that go into complications, go into pneumonia. But when you've got a situation where 99.99% of the people did not die, and that was the way that it was with measles before they vaccine, I would say that that is a relatively harmless disease. Our parents deliberately exposed people of my age to measles and mumps and rubella. And of course, that's the other part of it, Dan, is not only are we concerned that the vaccine is not effective, but we're concerned about the things that have been added to it. So when people, when they add these adjuvants in, like aluminum or mercury as a preservative, or formaldehyde as exactly as a preservative, when they add these things in, those preservatives like mercury and formaldehyde, those are just there to increase the profits of the pharmaceutical companies, to increase the shelf life of the vaccine. So they're willing to inject your child with formaldehyde and with mercury in order to increase their profits. They inject you with aluminum to antagonize your immune system to try to get a response from you, because they fail to get a response in so many cases. So those are the things that we're concerned about. It's not that we don't understand how vaccines work. It's kind of like saying, you should eat potatoes because they're good for you. So here, have some McDonald's fries. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. McDonald's fries are not simply potatoes. They've got a lot of other stuff in them. They got 19 ingredients. One of them is a key ingredient in making silly putty, and there's a lot of preservatives in it. There's that case in Iceland where they had the last day that McDonald's was there was Halloween 2009. They bought a Big Mac and some fries, and they put it under a glass, and they've even got a webcam so you can watch this stuff not decompose. Here we are 6 years later, and it hasn't changed in appearance whatsoever. So don't tell me that your fast food French fries are simply potatoes. In the same way, I don't want you to tell me that these vaccines are simply vaccines.
Oh yeah, speaking of McDonald's, I mean, McDonald's right down in your state, Texas, was giving out vaccines with the Happy Meal. I mean,
yeah, in Amarillo, Texas, yeah, absolutely. But in the wake of all this, what I find really dangerous, Dan, is the fact that they have absolute contempt anymore for informing us. We know that with every level of government. Every level of government is closed-lipped about everything they do. We're not allowed to take pictures of the police on the streets. We're not allowed to know anything that happens in government, whether it's at City Hall or whether it's at the White House. Everything now is a national security secret. Everybody is acting as if they are the CIA. And quite frankly, they are the CIA. Quite frankly, they are East Germans when they act like that. So we're not allowed to know anything about anything. They need to know everything about you and I, but we're not allowed to know anything about the government. And then they could care less whether they get our consent about anything. So why should we be surprised when they say, we're going to come in and force inject you without your consent? They don't get our consent for anything the government does. In the Declaration of Independence, it says, that just government governs by the consent of the governed, right? So they don't care about the consent of the governed anymore. They don't care about the consent of the individual, and that's what's so scary. And we see this as an orchestrated campaign by the pharmaceutical companies and the big media companies that they own. And nothing typifies this more than this Time magazine report, where you've got Jeffrey Kluger, editor-at-large for Time, saying Facebook must shut down the anti-vaxxers. And listen to what he says, Dan. He says, every unvaccinated child in this mother's brood, that's their word, and this mother's brood increases the risk to the neighborhood, the school, the community, the entire herd. See, they don't have herd immunity. They've either got individual immunity or they got nothing. And when you go back and you look at the fact that 52% of the people who had measles in 1987, 52% of them had been vaccinated. What's that say about herd immunity? It says it's a figment of their imagination. All they have is a herd mentality, and they could care less about our individual rights. And what he's saying is, we need to put pressure on Facebook to shut this down. And he says, of course, it says
violate your First Amendment now.
Yeah. Well, he points out it's not the First Amendment because they're not a government organization, but he's calling for censorship, nevertheless. And when he's saying that Facebook has the freedom to shut this down because they're not a government agency, they can shut down your speech, even though it is kind of a public forum. And they've had court cases, whether or not you agree with them. The standing law is that if you've got a place of business, it is open to the public, and you can't discriminate as to who's going to come into that business, right? So you can't say, get out of here, I don't like the way you look, get out of my restaurant or whatever. Or better yet, the classic case, you're a black person, I'm not going to serve you in this restaurant. No, they say, if you've got a public business like a restaurant or a mall, you can't come in and say certain people cannot be in here, okay? So, but what he's saying is, you should do that on Facebook. And now I disagree with that fundamentally. But then what he says is, well, they have the freedom to choose who they're going to allow to talk on Facebook because it's private. What about my freedom of choice? What about my freedom of choice not to be injected with something? Okay, he could care less about that. That's what's so very dangerous about this. I got to tell you, Dan, this is my line in the sand. Somebody tries to come and shoot me with something without my consent or my family, I'm shooting back.
Oh, absolutely. You know, damn straight.
Yeah.
And how dare they say, oh, it's our right to choose, but then again, they want to violate other people's rights. I mean, how the hell does that even work? You know what I mean? And
exactly.
You would defend yourself. You know what I mean? Like, if they come, you have to get vaccinated. Yeah, over my dead body, you got to vaccinate me.
Isn't it interesting, Dan, that the people who are always talking about being pro-choice, they're the ones that are stridently saying, we gotta force these damn anti-vaxxers to get their vaccines. We can't let them have informed consent. The people who say they're pro-choice, the only thing they're pro-choice about is about killing their unborn children. And then you've got this guy with Time magazine saying, forget about freedom of the press, forget about freedom of speech. This is a private group, and they've got their own choice as to what they want to go out there. Well, what about my choice of what I want to have stuck in me, okay? And then he goes down here and talks about what the site shouldn't be, talking about Facebook. He says the site should not be a vector for lies, especially that can harm children. Well, I would ask him, who's the final arbiter of truth? Is it Time magazine? Is it Facebook? Who decides? The government? Who gets to decide what's true when you no longer have a marketplace of ideas? And that's the key. These people are losing the argument, so why do they respond? With a gun in your face. That's the way they always respond.
Absolutely. But then you want to take the guns away from you so you can't defend yourselves against the criminals or them. And so you notice how that works? They throw up their rights, the Constitution, to defend themselves, but yet they want to take your rights away. You know?
Oh, yeah. It's very, very selective. A lot of conflict, a lot of hypocrisy in the way they're putting this stuff out there. It's absolutely amazing.
It is. It's really crazy. And, people, again, we need to rise up, and we need information revolution like we're pushing now. People just to rise up. And I know people are not going out to the polls anymore, but now is a point, all right, we have to do something now. We have to do something. And, that, like that TV show Network, that movie Network, you got to get mad. You got to get mad first to realize, hey, we're being duped on every level. And vaccines, everything from, legislative to they're just jamming bills, anti-constitutional bills down our throats. The police state's going out of control. I mean, the technocracy control grid, it's off the hook. And, this is just unheard of.
Absolutely. It really is an information war, isn't it, Dan?
Absolutely.
When they can lie to people, get them scared, present their pre-engineered solution in response to the events, the false flags that they have, they'll win. And so it really is important for us to get out there and fight with the information, to put things in the right context, to ask the right questions, to wake up the public, because you and I both know there's a lot of people that are awake, many more waking up. It's an increasing trend. It's enough that it really is worrying them. I mean, they're talking about what's going on. All these anti-vaxxers in California. It's these Silicon Valley techies, the highly educated people who say, hey, I can educate my kids at home better than you can do it, and I don't agree. I don't give you my informed consent because I've read the inserts on these vaccines, and they're complaining about these people. It really is an education issue. The educated people are the ones who are opting out and saying, I don't want this stuff. I've looked at it. I've done my investigations on this. I've seen that there's a lot of information that's being withheld. There's a lot of censorship going on here, but the information that I do see calls me to question whether this is safe and effective. And you need to give me information before you're going to get consent. And when you tell me you don't need my consent, then we don't have anything to talk about anymore. And I think that's a key thing. And so they're coming after our informed consent. They're coming, talked about with immigration stuff, they're coming after our jobs. They're taking down our economic opportunities. They're lowering our wages, and they're raising our taxes. They're taking us down economically. But there's another aspect of this too, Dan, and that is they're coming after our movements. They're trying to control our movement. It is not going to stop at the airport. We've seen tremendous outrages, of course, as you've reported about many times with the TSA, abuses of the Fourth Amendment. But the TSA is not an airplane security administration. It's a transportation Okay, that's their focus is transportation. It's full spectrum. They have the Viper teams, that's where but they want to go farther than that. They're going to take control of our cars. Once they have control of our cars, they can enact Agenda 21 very easily. They can keep us out of areas of the country they don't want us to go into because we won't be able to drive into those areas. They can limit when we travel. They can enact essentially a curfew 24/7, 365. It's a very, very dangerous thing. We need to understand that the government, especially authoritarian governments, have always been predominantly concerned with controlling movement. That's why they had passports. That's why you would have Nazi soldiers stop people on the streets and say, give me your identity. And that's why we're going to have these so-called driverless cars or self-driving cars. I call them computer-driven government control cars because that's what they are. And I don't think very many people realize how quickly this is going to be coming towards us. I think it's going to happen within the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. I remember the Google cars they were talking about. In
Oh, yeah.
Massachusetts, years ago, they introduced in legislation to put a GPS tracking chip on your inspection sticker so they could track you and tax you for the miles that you drive. But it got shot down quickly because a lot of people rose awareness about that. But it shows, hey, they're pushing, and it's already been in legislation in other states too. So it shows you right there, it's on the doorstep, folks, and we need to put a stop to this.
That's the way they're going to roll this out. They're going to stop people from driving in their cars because they have this infrastructure where they can completely track you all the time in the car. Every inch of the road turns into an instant speed camera. You go over the speed limit, instantly you get insurance points and you get a fine from the government. They can control you. They're going to look at it as anybody who is driving is going to be a threat to those who are driving around in their computer cars because you're the wild card. You can't be controlled. All these other cars can talk to each other, and they've already mandated that new cars are going to have vehicle-to-vehicle information. So that information is going to be broadcast all the time, how fast you're driving, the way that you're driving for your insurance company. It's not just something that they're going to get access to when they get your chip. It's something they're going to know in real time, all the time. But the thing that concerns me so much about all this, Dan, is the fact that if you go back and you look at authoritarian regimes, like I mentioned, of course, it was Hitler who created the Autobahn and the interstate system. Eisenhower copied it here. He had one episode where he tried to move a convoy up the East Coast, and he wrote a small book about it because it was such an ordeal trying to get these military vehicles. And then shortly after that, in World War II, he saw Hitler's Autobahn. It's like, that's what we need here. Because the fundamental impetus of the interstate system was really to serve as transportation for the military. The fact that we were able to use it, that was fine. That was the way they sold it to the public. But that was never the key motivation behind it for the federal government. Now, when we look at these driverless cars, it's important to remember that the very first DARPA competition, of course, we all know about the DARPA competition where they had the creepy science fiction robots last year, right? That was very well publicized, and we saw the Atlas robot and made these other robots. And it's like, yeah, don't tell me that those robots that can run faster than people, they make them so that they can run much faster than people. Don't tell me those robots are there because you want to use them in some kind of Fukushima emergency. You don't need robots that can run like that. You don't need robots that have got rifles in their arms or whatever. But that's what DARPA is not there to create medical devices. DARPA is there to create the next generation of military weapons. That's their mission statement. Regardless of what they say, they always try to cloak it in something that's going to help people, saying that we're looking at the brain because we want to help people who have PTSD. We want to be able to selectively remove their memories. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's purely humanitarian. No, they're trying to weaponize technology. And the very first DARPA competition, Dan, was self-driving cars. They've been working on this for the longest period of time. And now they're getting ready to roll this out. And you see that not only is it Google that's getting involved in it, of course, about a year ago, they changed all the laws in Europe as well as in America. And so you get competition where if one side legalizes it, then the other side is, if Europe legalizes it, America is going to legalize it because they don't want to get left behind. But legalizing autonomous cars on the road, that's done. And now they've got multiple cars that are on the road in Europe that are driving, where they've got 4 cars that they're talking about in Britain, 4 different types of vehicles are logging the miles in Britain. But I think this is really interesting. There was an article in Popular Science. The title is Driverless Car Race from Paris to Beijing, quote, would be close to impossible. Nevertheless, they are going to do a movie. Sony Pictures has green-lighted a movie that'll be a comedy. They're going to call it The Driverless Car Race. It's kind of like The Great Race. I don't know if you remember that movie that had Tony Curtis. Yeah, and Jack Lemmon and Natalie Wood. You know, the early days of automobiles, they took a very long race, and these cars were constantly breaking down, that sort of thing. Well, they're going to do a comedy now, but they're going to base it with the 21st century driverless cars. And if you look at the Google cars you were just talking about here in this picture, I mean, this thing is really why the castrated captives of the future are going to be driving it. This is kind of the automotive equivalent of the cone of shame. If you remember Up, you know, where the dogs, and they put the vet cone on them, and they're apprehensive because, first of all, they're kind of scared. They don't really know what's going on with them. And then they also kind of look embarrassed. And I would be embarrassed to be in this thing, but I would also be afraid to be in it. There's no brake, there's no steering wheel. You have no control over this thing. And but of course, they're going to use this, Dan, as predictive programming to get people used to the idea of driverless cars, something that they should see as a very dangerous threat. They're going to kind of laugh it off in a comedy, and that's kind of cool. You know, we had a lot of problems, and it's going to be kind of fun when we all get our driverless cars on the road and we kind of work out the kinks. That's the way they're going to put this thing out there.
The GPS system goes down, a satellite crashes, or anything happens. Could you imagine the catastrophe across the country?
Oh, absolutely. And there's been cover-ups already of uncontrolled acceleration in cars, because we've already got a lot of subsystems within the cars that can get out of control, that can have a bug in them. Whenever that happens, we know what's going to happen because we've already seen it happen. The automobile companies will come in, they will quietly pay off the victims with millions and millions of dollars, and then they will say, our cars are perfectly safe, unlike human drivers. And yet it's humans who are going to be programming these cars. As humans, you know, they'll just have a different kind of mistake. Instead of getting a blue screen of death when your IBM, your Microsoft computer dies, you're going to get a real screen of death when your computer software dies and drives you off the road. But we should also be very concerned, Dan, about the ability of people to hack it, especially the government's to hack into these cars and to make function in a way that could suicide people. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects to this that we should be very, very concerned about. But I think it's interesting to see how they use movies as predictive programming. We saw this happen with Sony's interview. They were basically trying to put the meme out there that Kim Jong-un needed to be assassinated in North Korea. And they had emails going back and forth between the State Department, between the RAND Corporation saying, yeah, we want to have regime change in North Korea, and the only way that that's really going to happen is assassination. So we need to put this out there and get people used to it. And we know that this video is going to play in South Korea. It'll be on DVDs. And we know that those DVDs will make their way to North Korea. And that'll put the idea before the North Korean people that they really do need to assassinate Kim Jong-un. Now, that was in a comedy, Dan. That was in the Sony interview, where they are deliberately using that as predictive programming to try to manipulate public opinion. Now, this Sony picture about driverless cars, that's exactly what they're doing. Sony has come out as one of the most recent companies to come out, just like Apple in the last week or so. They've talked about how Apple is going to jump into the driverless car market. Sony is doing the same thing. Just 2 weeks ago, they came out and said that they're going to start developing driverless car technology. And so we find out at the same time they're going to start doing that, they've green-lighted a movie picture to get people used to the idea of driverless cars. Isn't that interesting?
This is going to be on video games, this is going to be on kids' cartoons. Just like you said, predictive programming to get people subtle to the idea of this. But we got about a minute left, and I want to thank you for joining us. And if you want to tell people where they can reach you. If you got a personal website, we know Infowars.com, but I mean, if you got any personal websites or anything.
You know, the best way to reach me is just to send information to the writers or send information to Infowars.com. I social media pretty much. I don't have time for it. I only use Twitter as a news aggregation source. I don't even really tweet. So that may change in the future, but yeah, I do have a channel that I put up some of my special reports on. That's a sub-channel off of the Alex Jones channel. But that's the best way to find me, to get in touch with me, is perhaps through that YouTube channel. That's a sub-channel.
Absolutely. And David, I want to thank you again, and hope to see you soon. I'm trying to get down to Austin sometime and see you, hang out with you guys and see how everything's going. And I heard about the new studio looking great.
Yeah.
And you're doing a kick-ass job, brother.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you, Dan.
Yeah,
Hope
take
you can
care,
make
brother. God bless
it.
you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And that's David Knight for Infowars.com. And folks, thank you for joining us on the show. Investigate this. I mean, we're going to put the articles up on the screen. Investigate everything you heard, everything you've seen. And we're out of time. This is Dan Bidondi for Truth Radio Show on ShakeAwakeRadio.com, FreedomizerRadio.com, and AlternateCurrentRadio.com. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, Truth Radio Show. And this is Dan Bidondi. God bless.